Hi guys, I hope you are doing great. Welcome to my channel. Here we are with another episode of C# tutorial. In this episode, we're going to learn what is object-oriented programming. If you haven't subscribed the channel yet, don't forget to subscribe it. And if you enjoyed the video and find it useful, don't forget to like it. It will be a great support. Let's begin. First of all, you have to know what is OOP and what OOP stands for. It stands for Object-Oriented Programming. Okay, Object-Oriented Programming is a programming style where you create chunks of code that are modeled after real-world objects. You know, in object-oriented programming, there are two main concepts, okay? Which are classes and objects. Okay, a class is a template for objects, and an object is an instance of a class. Okay, for example, here we have a class which its name is car. Okay, and BMW is an instance of a car, or Ford or other cars. Okay, they are instance of a class. For example, imagine a house. A house is a class, and for example, my house or your house is instance of a class. Class is more general concept. And when object is created, and as I said, object is an instance of a class. When object is created, all the features, all the members of a class is inherited by that object. For example, in the real life, a car is an object, okay, and that car has some attributes like its color and its weight, and also it has some methods like drive and a brake. When you define a class, when we create a new class, anything that is a part of a class is called a member. This member can be attribute, method, or constructor. I will explain one by one what these are. Attributes are instance variable of a class. Okay, for example, as I said, weight is an attribute of a car, or color, for example, is an attribute of a house. And also you can add methods to the class which operate on instance of variable that class has. Okay, you can change the variables, change the amount of variables. You can actually work with those attributes with these functions. You can define a function and work with the attributes, and you can also get input from outside of the class with these functions. Okay, when you define a class, this is the shape of the class. Okay, a class, for example, here we have book class. As you see, we first write class and then the name of the class. I will show you how we can create a class in Visual Studio in C# in a minute. Okay, now I want to show you how we can create a class in Visual Studio. Okay, here I created a new project as usual, and right here in the Solution Explorer, I right click on our solution and I go on add, and here I click new item, and right here the first one is class. Okay, down here I can set a name for it. I can, for example, set a name to book. I want to create a class which its name is book, and I click on add, and our class is generated. Okay, now I want to tell you about an important concept in object-oriented programming, which is access modifier. You know, everything in a class has an accessibility level. An accessibility level indicates where it can be accessed from, and we have two different modifiers, private and public. And we also have protected, but it is out of the scope here. I will tell you later on this tutorial, but now just focus on private and public. The private keyword make it only accessible from inside of the class, anything outside of the class do not even know that this attribute exists. For example, here in this example, we have a string of title, and if you, for example, create an object of this class, and if you want to set a title or get the amount of title, you cannot do it, and you do not even know whether this exists or not. But in contrast, we have public accessibility. It means that it can be seen and used from anywhere inside the class or outside the class. And here we have to be careful about public accessibility, because the problem with this kind of accessibility is that it makes it too easy for the outsider to actually modify the class's data, which is not maybe desirable for us. For example, we have a book class, and we intentionally or unintentionally modify the word count to a negative number, which is actually meaningless, and we have to be careful about the level of accessibility that we assign to our attributes. And here we reach to an important concept, encapsulation, which is of paramount importance in programming. A class has a role, and that is, it should protect the integrity of its data. If you do not put access modifier, it is automatically defined as private, but as I said, private is a default accessibility level, but in order to make it clear for example, your colleague, or for example, for yourself when you want to review that code, it is recommended to use a private keyword. Okay, as I wrote here, a class should keep its integral data private, but sometimes we have to change the value of those attributes. You know, class must act as a gatekeeper, and it have to make sure that only reasonable changes are performed. For example, we have to define some methods that check whether this value, which is going to be assigned to our attribute, is valid or not. And we will reach to another concept as a getter and setter. I will explain later, but bear in mind that encapsulation is really important, and you have to be aware where you put private and public keywords. Okay, here I'm going to show you how we can actually define attributes. We just need to write private if you want that attribute to be private, and you just need to define the type of it, string for example, and the name of the string. I want it to be for example title, and that's it. Our attribute is defined now. We can for example define a public attribute like for example int and number of, for example, pages. This is another attribute which is public. And here in programming, in our main page, I need to, for example, I want to create an object. I just need to write book here and just a name, and I have to use new keyword to create new object and book. Here I created a new object, and now I want to access to those attributes. I just need to use book, the name of the object, use dot, and here these are the attributes and methods of the class. In other words, they are the members of the class. Okay? These for equals, get hash code, get type, and toString, they are actually fixed, and all of the objects that we define have these methods. And as you see, I can just access to this attribute, which is the number of pages, and there is no sign of our title attribute because it is private, and from outside the class, which is here, I cannot access it. I can set a for example number to, for example, 5, and here there is no error. But if I try to access to that attribute, which is title, you see there is no title here. As you see here, book title is inaccessible due to its protection level, so we cannot access it. Okay, now let's see what are constructors. Sometimes we want to initialize our attribute, or we want to run a function of a class as the object is created. Okay, then we use constructor. Most of the time we use it to initialize the value of the attribute. Well, the first, as I write here, the first key difference here is that a constructor must share the name same as the class, while a normal method is forbidden from doing this. I'll show you how we can define constructor, and also we don't need to have just one constructor. We can have 2, 3, or as many constructors as we want, but we have to bear in mind that if you want, for example, have 2 constructors, actually arguments must be different. For example, sometimes there is a constructor without any arguments, but there are also other constructors with 2 or 3 arguments. And the second difference is that constructors do not and cannot specify a return type. They do not return anything. They act as void. And constructor also can be public and private, but actually almost always we define them as public because we need to access them from outside in order to initialize the value of our attributes. And the last thing I want to say, as I said before, the constructor is allowed to have parameters. Here we have an example of constructor. As you see here, public book is a constructor. It has 2 arguments, string title and string author. And here we have this keyword I will explain later in this course. Okay, here we have multiple constructor concept. As I said, a class can have multiple constructors. You can have as many constructors as you want. Actually, the most important goal of a constructor is to ensure that the instances of the class, actually the objects, are put into a value starting state. For example, when you want to create an object of a class, at the first point you have to actually deal with its constructor. So this way we ensure that our creation of the object is safe. Here is example of a multiple constructor. On the left picture you see it has just one constructor, but on the right page you see it has 2 constructors. The first one has 2 arguments. The second one has actually 4 arguments. Okay, here I want to define a constructor for this class. I write public keyword, and the name of the class, which is book, and I want a constructor without any arguments. And I have to tell you, if you do not define any constructor, by default a constructor without any argument is created. And if you create a constructor without arguments, that constructor that was created by default will be deleted, and your new constructor will be replaced by that. And this is our new constructor, and I can have another constructor with some inputs. For example, I get string book. Let's define it to string title. In order to not to be confusing, I just write underline title here, and in this constructor I set our title to underline equals to underline title. Okay, and then I want to use console dot write line. Here I want to print this title. Okay, here I create another object. 1 equals to new book, and you see here it has 2 overloads, and I can use the second constructor. I set a name. I set it to my book, for example. Okay, and I have to use console.read key in order not to actually immediately disappear our terminal. And then I run the program, and here you see my book is printed because here I defined a new object of the class, and I use the second constructor, and in the second constructor I set the value of title and then printed the title. Okay, this is the end of this session. We will continue learning about object-oriented programming later. We will actually learn other concepts, but I think it's enough for this session. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to subscribe it, and if you enjoyed the video and find it useful, don't forget to like it. Bye for now.